Oh, this is my favourite part of the entire information session, when the doors have been flung open and the number of attendees is just starting to bounce up and up and up and up and up. There's about 40 of you who've got in already. We'll give it a couple of seconds so people can get in. I'll commence the introduction in about 15 seconds or now. Until then, chat amongst yourselves. Look at that, almost 50 of you joining us. Fantastic. Let's kick this off. A big hello and a warm welcome to all of you. My name's Adam Spencer, proud to be your host for tonight's Churchill Fellowship information session. Can I start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from land traditionally under the custodianship of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. As I said, my name is Adam Spencer. Some of you may know me as the host of the super smash hit podcast, The Churchill Collective, a roaring success, second only to Smartless and Joe Rogan in the Australian market at the moment, as far as I understand. But in all seriousness, in the course of hosting this podcast, where I get the inside story from Churchill Fellows and what drew them to the program and what they got out of it, I've been able to meet over 20 Churchill Fellows from every possible background, everything from a woman I spoke to live from a French kitchen where she was learning the intricacies of charcuterie cuisine, to a man who was obsessed with unit pricing. You know those little tags you get in the shops down the bottom that say, oh, that would effectively be 30 cents for 100 grams, so you can compare different items. He was the guy who got that introduced in Australia, and everything in between. It's been an absolute blast. And on the topic of interesting people, tonight, I do know we've got many first responders joining us. Paramedics, SES, firefighters, and the like. So a sincere thank you for the service you've already given to the community. And thank you, all of us, for being here and joining us for what is possibly the start of your fellowship journey. We're happy to have you here for our information service on public service. Before we get underway, I would love you to tell us one thing about you, and that is your postcode. We'd love to have a vague geographic spread of exactly who is dialing in today. So a little postcode poll should just have come up on your screen right now. Click in there and tell us your postcode. I just tried to do it and was told hosts and panelists can't vote. Sorry about that. But tell us your postcode so we know roughly where around Australia we are reaching this evening. Now, in this session, you'll hear from the Trust and 2 Churchill Fellows. They'll speak to their fellowship journey and experience, as well as sharing helpful advice on how to apply and how to learn a little bit more about how their fellowship has continued to support their work once they return from overseas. Now, throughout the course of the night, if a question pops into your head, just tap the Q&A icon and send a question through. Some questions will be answered in the course of the session. So if you thought you asked a question, then you look there and it's not there anymore, it's probably flicked over into the answered tab, and you should be able to find it there. And at the end of our conversation this evening, we'll leave the session open for another 10 minutes or so you can all pop over and check out all of the answered questions that have been logged during the course of the evening, in case there's anything else there that is of interest for you. So to start off and give us a bit of a rundown on the Churchill Trust and the Fellowship Program, please welcome the one and the only Rachel Sir. Rachel, over to you.
Hey, Adam, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this information session about Churchill Fellowships in 2024. My name is Rachel Sir, and I'm the Communications Manager at the Winston Churchill Trust. Super excited to see you guys here. And so, look, without further ado, I will be sharing my screen, and I have a PowerPoint that I would like to launch for you. Just bear with me, because here we go. Let's go. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am, which I'm in Canberra, so it's the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. So, as you know, the Winston Churchill Trust is here to honour the memory of Sir Winston Churchill. So basically, in 1965, when Winston Churchill passed away, there was widespread desire to honour this great man and just be able to capture his inspiration for years to come. At that time, there was the largest door knock appeal around Australia that had ever happened. And over 220,000 Australians participated in that, and there was strong RSL support. They raised around $4 million at that time. And so since then, that money has been held in a trust, and hence the Winston Churchill Trust was born. So what is a Churchill Fellow? They're basically people who are passionate or committed to an issue, and they want to learn from overseas, and they want to bring that knowledge back to Australia. They want to see things improve in Australia. So that might be you. You've got a passion area. And basically, you know, it's for everybody. There's no academic qualifications required at all. In fact, you don't even need to finish school to apply. It's open for everybody, and it's for 4 to 8 weeks of travel. And there've been over 4,700 fellowships awarded, and every year there's about 100 awarded. What do you need to do to be eligible? An Australian citizen or permanent resident over the age of 18. And that's about it. There's no other, you know, there's no age limit, there's no upper age limit. They cannot form part of tertiary studies. But aside from that, that's it. What is your passion? And basically, it's got to bring back a benefit to the Australian community. If you can see a problem, or you can see a topic that needs to be further explored because you know that there's benefits overseas, that they're doing things better, and you know the countries, then that's it. It's a self-contained project, and it doesn't have to relate to employment. It can, and some of our fellows will be able to share a bit about that, but it could just be a hobby, it could be a passion. It doesn't necessarily have to be your area of work. You get to design your own topic. That is the beauty of it. We don't set the topic. So there might be people on this info session. You might not be part of the public service and courts and emergency services. You might be from arts, or you might be from health. There's no limit on the topic. We don't set it. You tell us what your topic is and where the opportunity is. And we're super excited about it to see applications rolling in. So 1 March, which is this week, it's Friday, applications open. So we're so excited. You hop onto the website at churchillfellowships.com.au and you can stick your application in. And that's about it. At the end of the application, there's a couple of things you need to know, like you need some references, 2 references, 1 personal, 1 professional. So think about who they're going to be now. Don't leave that till the last minute. Also, there's a little 60-second video pitch, and we would love you to just, in a nutshell, tell us what your passion project is and what your fellowship application is about. The video is meant to be very authentic as well, and nothing fancy, nothing edited. We really don't want that. So in terms of your itinerary, what you need to do is obviously don't try to cram too much in. You want to leave some room and some space for those fortuitous moments where you might make a connection overseas, and then they all might recommend you should go down the road and talk to that person, for example. You need to leave space and not burn yourself out. And so when you put it in the application form, be specific. So you include where you want to go. So your city, as well as your state and the country. So for example, Dallas, Texas, USA, as an example. And this year, people can depart from November. So how does the selection process work? You might like to know. So around the states and territories, we have a range of panels and committees. And what they do is they read through the applications, they shortlist them, and then they call people in for interviews. And about half of the people that attend interviews will actually be awarded a fellowship. So making it to the interview stage is a really prestigious achievement. So well done. And then after that, it's very exciting. In early October, we have an onboarding session in Canberra where we bring in all of the successful applicants. And that is super exciting for everybody. So basically, the tips that I have for you are: speak in very plain language, be very succinct, and just be very clear. There's no need to go into lots of jargon. You try to avoid jargon if at all possible, but really step out the need for your project and why you're passionate about it and why you've been chosen. And then it's about bringing back your findings. So you'll be asked sort of how will you share the findings when you get back to Australia, and how will you implement change in your field? So that's it in a nutshell. But in closing, it's a competitive process, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply. You should apply. We want you to apply. We definitely do. The fact that you're even here speaks volumes. You're obviously really passionate and interested, and that's fantastic. So from 1 March, start your application. Yes, it's a competitive process, but believe in yourself and don't be shy, because just put that step forward. And our small team here in Canberra are just so excited to see the applications rolling in from 1 March. And that's it from me, Adam.
Fantastic, Rachel. Thank you very much. Rachel's going to stay on the call and will be part of our Q&A. So if you've got any questions, I've seen a couple have come in already about timelines and the like. As I said, some of those questions will be answered live now. So if you see it vanish off the list, just check over to the answered section already. At the end of the session, we'll hold the video. Once the video is closed, sorry, we'll hold the session open for another 10 or so minutes. Check out all the answered questions then. But if you've got any other questions for Rachel, send them through and I'll put them to her during the Q&A. Let's go now to our first Churchill Fellow. Hayden McComas has been a volunteer firefighter with the South Australian CFS since 2012. Before then, he'd served the public via the Regular Army, South Australian Police and Australian Border Force. His Churchill Fellowship explored better leadership training for emergency services volunteers, people who might find themselves in extremely stressful situations, often with no formal training of what to do in those circumstances. On the topic of stressful situations, Hayden was approached just this afternoon after a scheduled panelist was suddenly unavailable. And in keeping with his ethic of service, he said, "No worries," and banged together a few ideas he's going to share with us now. Take it away, Hayden, you legend.
Oh, thanks, Adam. You're very, very kind and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, and I certainly welcome everybody who's dialed in. So between August and October 2022, I undertook a 55-day round the world Churchill Fellowship journey, which took me to New Zealand, the USA, Canada, Denmark, and the Philippines. And I did this research because, as Adam had said, Australian volunteer firefighters lead emergency response teams in various situations which are very high stress. They operate with partner agencies, and increasingly our people, particularly our volunteers, are operating across state and international jurisdictional lines. And many of the people who are filling leadership roles are doing this without any specific leadership qualifications or leadership experience or leadership development, which I found just mind-blowing that we would do this. So my fellowship research was intended to offer some strategic insight and some impetus towards helping us develop better leadership development for sustainable voluntary emergency services in Australia. Now, this is a key point. In January 2020, the Productivity Commission found that Australia's volunteer firefighting force had declined by 10%, about 16,000 volunteers in the past decade. And that's the fire service, not the state emergency services. They are seeing a similar decline. This decline is a significant risk to our disaster mitigation. And about half of all emergency services volunteers leave within the first 2 years of volunteering. And they often cite poor leadership and toxic culture as being factors. This really concerned me. And notwithstanding the importance of effective leadership, across Australia and the various jurisdictions who manage fire and emergency services, really down to the states and territories, we do not have a defined leadership development pathway for fire and emergency services volunteers. And we know that while paid staff will probably abide by poor leadership because they get paid, it's their job, the same cannot be said for volunteers because the exchange is a lot more precarious and the tolerance for poor leadership doesn't endure. So the journey pretty much took me around the world to explore what are we doing for leadership learning, how are we tackling it. And, I had a wonderful opportunity when I was in California visiting CAL FIRE at their training center at Ione, which is just outside of Sacramento. And the team there at CAL FIRE were really keen for me to see not just the leadership development stuff which they had invested very heavily in, and they were turning the ship around, if you like, for their agency. But they also ripped me over to McClellan, what used to be McClellan Air Force Base, which is where CAL FIRE run their fire aviation services from. And I'm dropped in amongst these massive aircraft. And they were very, very keen to, I mean, it wasn't part of my fellowship focus, but they really wanted to show me this. So I went along with them, and it was a really interesting day. And also, when I was in Denmark, the Danes at the Danish Emergency Management Agency took me out to Tinglev, which is a training facility where they run conscript training, because they still have conscription in Denmark. And the leadership development, the approach that they use there is woven into all of the experiences they have. But they had this entire town, which is set up for a disaster town. And they, again, were keen to show me some of the operational aspects of what they do, notwithstanding that wasn't necessarily why I was there. But I think one of the highlights for me was visiting the Boise, Idaho Great Basin smoke jumpers. These are the individuals who jump out of aircraft into fires with no water. They use hand tools to fight fires, and it's all about being able to manage a fire by parachuting in. And there I learned there's a leadership concept about giving leadership away, about bringing young people in as quickly as possible to get them into a leadership role, the young people expecting to take over the leadership, and importantly, the older senior volunteers expecting to step back and give leadership away. We don't see that a lot in Australia. I think we talk about it, but we don't see it. But the Bureau of Land Management smoke jumpers, they live that. That's how they do their work. While I was traveling, a couple of really unusual and unexpected things happened to me. I was in the Philippines, and I pulled up at the Philippine Bureau of Fire Safety, having arranged my contact with the Philippine people. The Filipinos were very, very gracious and were very keen to meet with me. And I turned up in a taxi, and I was wearing CFS uniform. The agency was kind enough to give me like a staff uniform for the journey. So everywhere I went in uniform because it opened doors. You sort of turn up, and it's a brotherhood, sisterhood thing, I suppose. And when I turned up at their headquarters in Manila, I tapped on the door, and there was a sign saying, "Welcome, Mr. Hayden McComas from Australia and delegation." And I looked around. There's only me. There's no delegation. And they'd set out an enormous amount of food. They'd set out, I said it was just me, and they had a welcoming committee for me, and they were quite surprised there was just me. But they were very, very gracious, and I sat with their executive for some time, and we had a chance to discuss the topic at hand, which was really, really good. They also invited me, and there's some of these things that happen on fellowships are very spontaneous. They also invited me to the 25th anniversary dinner of their public safety college, which is a military learning establishment that also deals with fire, police, corrections. And I was talking to their staff there about their leadership development concept at their college. And it was a matter of, well, we've got the dinner on tonight, come along. So they sort of welcomed me as an honored guest and sat me next to a retired Filipino defense minister, an ex-Filipino defense minister on one side, and a former head of the Filipino Defense Force on the other. And we had quite an animated conversation during dinner. Again, I had no anticipation I was going to be there for dinner. It was just one of those spontaneous invites that happen. And that's what happens in a fellowship. You've got to be able to be flexible, because things will pop up, opportunities will pop up, and it's about that bias to, I think this will contribute, even though I'm not clear on exactly how. I'm going to tease that story down that rabbit hole. That's some of the most brilliant connections that you make. And it's the connections you make there that cascade out beyond the travel, particularly when you're writing your report and you're following up with people, and they're supplying you with information. It's quite it's not only flattering, it's also quite moving that people are very keen to help. They're very enthusiastic to assist you in your journey. So in terms of what I've learned and achieved since returning to Australia, well, it's about getting a conversation going. Fire and emergency service agencies are very big. They're government run, even though they're run with volunteers. So trying to turn the ship around on organisations that have done something for a very long time. And you remember I mentioned earlier that CAL FIRE people wanted to take me to the airfield. The Danish Emergency Management Agency, yeah, we'll talk leadership. Can we show you our rescue stuff and how we do that? There's a focus in emergency services about wet stuff on red stuff, about rescue. Sometimes the leadership learning story is left to one side and it becomes a secondary thing. And so what I've learned is the same thing's occurring here in Australia. Yes, yeah, leadership's important. We'll get to that stuff. But at the moment, we've got a fire. At the moment, we've got a cyclone. But unfortunately, unless we can get on top of this leadership development stuff and get good team-based environments working right down at the micro level at your local brigades and your local units, our new volunteers, they won't join because they won't brook the kind of behaviours that unfortunately have emerged, both in Australia and overseas. It's actually been quite ugly. But we need to look inside our agencies, look inside ourselves and be prepared to change something. So for me, it's about getting a conversation going. And fortunately, I've been invited to speak in coming weeks to the CFA executive. I've got a presentation to the Women in Emergency Services Network coming up in a couple of weeks. And Fire and Rescue Victoria, their Learning and Development Network, I'll be in Melbourne in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm doing a workshop on leadership development design based on what I experienced in the fellowship. It's a casual conversation, but there'll be a number of people from a number of Victorian emergency services agencies joining us for that. So that'll be really good. And I also ran a workshop for the ACT, Rural Fire Service, and their emergency services agency to sort of raise the view and get them to think about the importance of leadership development for their people. So it's a slow journey. It's not about getting instant results. And I think this goes to the idea about being a Churchill Fellow for life. One of the questions was posed to me earlier when I was coming here was, what's the best thing about being a Churchill Fellow? And I sort of thought about that. And it's really about expanding your thinking, challenging your understanding, and not necessarily looking for quick solutions. Sometimes just understanding the issue can be the first step in getting change. Change may not happen immediately. I think to be a good fellow, you do need to have some patience and be prepared to play a long game. It's not just about instant results. But in terms of preparing for your Churchill Fellowship application, a couple of things occur to me. You've got to be able to show that your topic has impact. Show that your topic, explain why your topic is important and why it makes a difference. I did this using a literature review. Rachel said these are not about academic, it's not academic research, it's not to contribute to any tertiary learning, but we can use some of the levers and tools in the academic world. So I did a literature review, which is only about 3,000 words, but it allowed me to fully understand at the time the depth of the topic. So when it came to writing the application, when it came to the interview, I was able to say, this is important and this is why. And I was really concrete on the research that showed we have a problem here. So it's about planning and thinking. Really important to find really well-placed referees. You'll have a project referee and you'll have a personal referee. Project referee is this mission, this research target is worth looking at. Your personal referee is around this individual is capable of doing this. They're quite different. They're quite different. They come together a bit like araldite, the two parts mixed together, and the sum is greater than the single part. So you need to think very carefully about who would be your referees, and they need to be well briefed on what you're doing and why. That will enable them to write a meaningful reference for you as part of the application process. So the other thought was in relation to my research, my fellowship, I sort of came out with 5 key emergent themes that we'd had mea culpa moments where emergency services in Australia and around the world had explosive reporting of unfortunate behaviours, bullying, hazing, sexual harassment, which led to an undermining of the agency. So this is happening overseas, it's happening here. So we have a real and emergent challenge. And it's about knowing our people, having leadership models, how we place our leadership development, and also our leadership learning connection. These themes are all challenging, but again, for me, it's about getting a conversation going there. Very good. That's probably enough from me, Adam. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Hayden. Wonderful presentation, mate, especially at short notice. Can I ask you one quick question that came in? We had a question already posted by someone asking, is there strictly a limit on the number of countries you could go to? And the answer given from the trust was, no, there's not strictly a limit on the number you can go to, but we'd recommend going to a couple fewer countries in more depth rather than trying to go to too many places and risking burnout. You said you went on a 55-day tour. Did you think you got the balance just about right yourself? What would be your advice on that?
Oh, that's a great question and observation. I think for me, it was about right. I don't think it should have been any longer. I built my trip from the inside out because the first place I reached out to, because you build your idea of a fellowship and put in your application. You can't go to these people and go, I might be a Churchill Fellow. Would it be okay? So you're building a hypothetical. It's quite a challenge when the trust goes, it's like winning the lottery, isn't it? The trust rings and says, oh yeah, honey, I'm home, you've won. I've got to bring this thing to life. And for me, I started in Denmark because the connection with the Danes was actually the easiest. And that was right in the middle of the trip. So I built the trip outwards from there. 5 countries seemed to be a good mix for me. One of the critical things that I did was I left a full week by accident. I had a spare week. So I took a week right in the middle to do nothing in Copenhagen. It gave me time to think. That was critical because I would have burned out. Having some rest time in there is really important. It gives you time to think, to digest, to make your notes, to be covering off on your initial ideas, because you rest, but you sort of don't, but you do. So yeah, for me, 55 days, 5 countries worked well, I think.
Fantastic. Yes. And in the number of, across the 20 or so episodes I've recorded of the podcast, I'd say on average 3 or 4, sometimes 5 countries is sort of the number it lands at. I've not met anyone who's gone to 8 or 9, and some people have only gone to 1 or 2. Thanks, Hayden. We'll get you back for the Q&A soon, mate. Wonderful stuff. Our second speaker was awarded the Bob and June Prickett Churchill Fellowship in 2020 to research and assess UAV delivery methods of incendiary devices used in fuel reduction burning. Tom Morrison firmly believes that the safety of people involved in prescribed burning is paramount to ensuring the growth in the use of fire across Australia. Tom joins us now. Thanks for your time, Tom. Take it away, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and g'day to everyone out there. Thank you for tuning in, and really great to see such a turnout for a wonderful organisation like the Churchill Fellows. Just bear with me a moment and I'll share my screen here for you. Fantastic. Can everybody see that at the moment? All right, so back right at the start of COVID, I know it was quite a long time ago now, I applied to the Churchill Fellowships with the idea of, I guess, fundamentally trying to reduce the amount of low-flying hours that were conducted to undertake prescribed burning across the north of Australia and southern states, but particularly relevant to the north of Australia with the broad-scale carbon farming industry and fire management. So that was quite a few years ago now, so the process may have changed a little bit. There we go, that looks a little better. So essentially, at that time, there was a program that had started with the US Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, where they were, I suppose, front runners in developing how to operationally use drone or unmanned aircraft to deliver incendiaries to a fireground, either for prescribed burning or for back burning in wildfire response. The US at that time was about the only country doing that, and I think they're really the only ones established still with a dedicated and established program. There's a few other countries around the world that have started to get into it. So essentially, I started off with the idea of travelling there and embedding with a team that were using these drones, with the idea of travelling around the country with them and understanding how they were using those in the different environments across the US. Here's a photo from Tall Timbers Research Station, which is in the northern half of Florida, and some students there that had come to the academy class to learn how to use the equipment with an instructor, Joe Suarez, who's a Forest Service employee on the right there. He was a fantastic chap, and yeah, told a lot of good jokes, so that was fun. I attended the Incendiary Academy in Florida, so that was 1 week based in the classroom, and then 2 more weeks out on the road. So we actually ended up going to Georgia and Alabama and meeting local fire managers and trying to, I guess, incorporate the academy classes into what their local burning programs were. And then following that, I went on to take some opportunities that only emerged once I got over there, being that sort of undertaking 2 more weeks of training in California, one being intelligence gathering and basic UAS pilot course. And then following that, continuing on to another opportunity in Nevada, where I visited some memorials for lost firefighters and continued networking. Here's a great example of what it looks like. The downside of drone work is that once it's in the air, you don't really see it. It's just a bunch of guys standing around looking at iPads. But it was really interesting to see how these guys coming from all over the country within a week could train to a level where they could function as a team and then execute local level prescribed burns and really convince locals that it was a fantastic way to increase their safety of their personnel. And just an example of the sort of stuff that they're looking at there, thermal imagery and mapping and all sorts of things incorporated into it. One of the highlights for me, I think, was just the opportunity to network. So because this course is this fellowship that I undertook took me into a multi-agency training Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, and from all corners of the US. So a number from Alaska, and I think there was even one fella from Hawaii. So it was an amazing melting pot, and I've made some contacts there that are ongoing today. I was talking to a fella in Cal Fire who actually Hayden works at McClellan Air Base. Yeah, Scotty Ekman, he's a good fella, and a number of other people that are now becoming part of my network and are ongoing connections that we're bouncing ideas off each other and we're trying to work forwards to help each other, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think that's probably one of the biggest highlights for me, is just establishing that network and having those relationships where you can reach out and really work through some of these problems that locally might not be as easy to fix. So for follow-up opportunities, as I was saying,
I think we might have just lost Tom there. He was having a little bit of trouble with his connection earlier. So while behind the scenes, the Churchill Trust people frantically try and get Tom back online, and I'll get a little message when we do have him. I might commence the Q&A with, I see Tom's name back up there, so I'm just going to pause for a couple of seconds till we see his smiling face again. And if he's back to talk to us, we'll continue. I'll give him a minute. You there, Tom?
We're there. Sorry, folks. I mean, Alice Springs sort of out of town a little bit at the moment. So
all good, mate. We've got you there. Pick it up.
Me.
Share the screen again and take us back to where you were. We'd heard up till a couple of seconds ago. Just bring that screen up. We'll check. There we go.
I think we're here. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, obviously within the industry, and then there was ancillary organisations that I managed to build relationships as well. So some contacts there with NASA, which now I'm trying to sort of exploit to get some joint project work between CSIRO potentially. Out of it also, there's been a lot publicly around, I guess, what the program is for the US and how it may benefit especially smaller organisations and governments like the Northern Territory government, which, you know, we are very resource poor. You know, any opportunity that we can get to save time, money, and lower risk is particularly important to us. So planning out your application. So I think it's really crucial that you break down what you want to achieve and understand and the benefits of how that may affect Australia as a whole. So if you can sort of really break down what your topic of interest is, and then the spin-off benefits of how that may potentially change your industry or your topic of interest, you know, it might be a hobby or you know, some sort of activity. That's a really good thing to do. I think that helped me a lot with my application in that it sort of laid out essentially some really fundamental questions that I had to ask and to try and answer by the end of the fellowship. I found that I reviewed my fellowship quite a few times, so leaving enough time to be able to do that, I think, is very crucial. And you know, feel free to get other people to have a look over it and question what you want to learn. So make sure that your application sort of lines up with how that is. And also the really big one, and Hayden does this quite well, is get passionate about it, because it's really how you build those relations and how you can establish communications when you're, you know, cold calling people from the other side of the world, which is a part of it. Is getting that passion going so that people understand that you're not coming over there to waste time. You're coming over there essentially to take that opportunity and really understand what it is that they're doing differently to the rest of the world at the moment. Whoops, sorry guys. So planning your travel in detail, so 2 to 3 months out, I found it really crucial to really increase the amount of engagement that I was doing with my contacts that I've made over there. And that goes, you know, you really want to start to establish some relationships with these people that's going to form an ongoing communication. The other big thing is just to make sure that there's flexibility in your trip. So there was opportunities that arose only when I got there, and that if I had have booked out the whole time to one thing, I think I may have missed out on some really key learning opportunities. And the other thing is, you know, remember to have fun with your host. It's not all about meetings. Sometimes it might just be, hey, you know, it's an afternoon here. Let's go for a bushwalk. And you know, sometimes getting your hosts or your key contacts out of that sort of formal setting can really provide some different information as to what's actually going on, and put some perspective behind some of the stuff that may not be clearer in a more formal setting. I'm not an academic person by any standards. I play in the operational stream with wildfires and land management in the Northern Territory. And so the requirement of obviously writing a report following this trip was looming over me. But I think, you know, you've just got to dedicate some time to it. And after a trip like that, you know, depending on what your topic is, I think you're going to have more than enough questions and answers to be able to write your report. I found that as I was going along, it was really valuable to make some quite detailed notes. So I found myself almost nightly writing up just on my iPad, you know, just a quick summary of the conversations that I've had and who I saw for that day, which then really helped when it came down to getting the report written. And I guess, you know, have fun with it, especially during the report writing time. It can be a little bit stressful, but that's also a good time to reach out and maintain these connections that you've already made and clarify anything that you need help with. because, so often I've found that, these people are over the moon that someone else is really interested in what they're doing. And I guess the other thing that I'd like to leave you all with is it is a fellowship. So the idea of reaching out to your fellows, to other people that have, to people like Hayden or any other fellows that have, already completed their trips. They've got some really important knowledge on so much stuff that can help you guys during the application process, as well as if you're successful, how to make things go a little smoother. So I'll end it there. I don't want to talk all night. I'm sure there's a lot more to cover. But yeah, all the best with your applications, and I really hope that you guys become fellows.
Great stuff, Tom. Thank you very much, mate. And thanks for putting up with the vagaries of technology from a beautiful part of Australia, albeit somewhat remote. A question for you, Tom, and then I'll put it through to Rachel as well. Tom, you received the Bob and June Prickett Churchill Fellowship. Now, a lot of times people see these named fellowships and they wonder, do I have to apply to that specifically, or do I just apply generally to the trust and the trust might line up a particular fellowship? What happened in your case?
Yeah, absolutely. So I applied for that specifically from memory because it was relevant to environmental matters and land management, and trying to further, I guess, the scientific endeavours behind land management, which is very crucial to the environment, especially I suppose with carbon farming in the Northern Territory and across the north of Australia. That was a particularly relevant part to my fellowship.
Great stuff, Tom. Rachel, do people have to name specific fellowships if they are attached to a foundation or a sponsor, or sometimes does the trust look through and go, oh, you'd be perfect to be lined up with this specific fellowship? How does that work, Rachel?
That's right. So please, by all means, research and look at the different sponsored fellowships and so forth. It's interesting, and there are very specific sponsored fellowships about different regions or topics and so forth. But you don't have to make mention of it or worry about it, because on our end, we look at all of the applications, we look at the sponsors, and then we marry those up. Then we do lots of liaison behind the scenes with the different sponsors where they are available or involved. So yeah, you don't have to worry. We just want you to put your application in.
Fantastic. There's been a couple of questions about the application. Someone asked, how detailed should the itinerary and costing be? And if it's proposed, but dependent on certain connections, which may not yet be locked in or can continue to evolve a touch, is that okay? How flexible are you from application to actual action?
There's definitely some flexibility prior to departure. So we do have a wonderful team member who will be able to assist you. Maddie, she's actually been on there answering some questions. But in your application, you should definitely put as much detail as you can, as you know. And that at that point, at the application point, you won't be locked in at that point. But it does get to a point where you agree on your itinerary if you're finalised, and from that point, that's where the fellowship is costed and no further changes can be made.
Great stuff. To both our fellows who are online, when you were overseas, what was the balance of the things you discovered over there? What was the balance between confirming things you already knew or finding out something radically different and really, evolving your beliefs in a certain space? I'll start with you, Tom, and then I'll get Hayden's thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I travelled, I had, there was a bit of an idea of what was going on over there with obviously the internet and, YouTube and these sort of things, and having brief conversations with people, but actually getting out in the field and understanding how the program operationally worked, how they were taking people who were potentially a low hour drone user and taking them to a level where they can operate at a level that was, suitable for wildfire response. Really sort of solidified for me, I guess, a lot of things with that training process. So it was particularly interesting in that you sort of understand what might be going on, but you get down with the people that are doing it. You know, you're driving in a car for hours, you start to understand what's actually happening in the background to make this function as something that you can then bring back and say, hey, this is what's working over here. We can adapt that to our local environment.
Great stuff, Tom. What about you, Hayden? What was the balance, reinforcing things you already thought or teaching you something completely new?
Oh, thanks, Adam. Look, a biggie that was very unexpected for me was coming across this idea of what I describe as the mea culpa moment. Bullying, hazing, sexual harassment, very poor leadership behaviours that cause detonations in agencies. We've had a few examples in Australia, and when I was travelling, looking at, well, how are you managing this? These places that I met and talked with, the people were really quite frank and open with me. Fire and Emergency New Zealand talked about the Coral Shore report, which was essentially a retired Supreme Court justice who did a review of Fire and Emergency New Zealand, and they tipped their dirty laundry down Main Street. And they are very open to, we have, you know, it's Houston, we have a problem. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And it led them to a path of change. They're further along the journey than we are. The New Zealanders are really smart and they're working on stuff. It's not perfect, but they're making good progress. Then in California, Cal Fire shared with me their mea culpa moment, a detonation. And so serious was it that both in New Zealand and in California, the legislature, the government, was querying, should these agencies even exist? The Fire and Emergency Service agencies have great social license. Everybody loves firefighters. They're really good. They're fantastic. But when things go wrong, the social license of the organisation is called into question. And there's the possibility of, you know, they talked about maybe we need to get rid of Cal Fire. So Cal Fire turned things around. And as I went around the world, everywhere I went, there were these similar situations where there was like massive explosions in the organisation, which led them to change. We've had some, what I think are minor explosions in Australia, but I'm just wondering what the lay of the land is. And it's about getting the organisations to think, yeah, we need to think carefully. We actually got to invest here. So I wasn't going looking for a problem, but unfortunately that became one of the lead parts, which is kind of confronting. Back to you.
Interesting stuff. I see that Rachel is typing an answer as we speak. So Rachel, I am going to get you to answer a question as well. So apologies for interrupting you, but it's the very thing you're asking there. There's been a couple of questions about how detailed do the applications need to be, or how long do they need to be? From what I understand, Rachel, there's reasonably strict word limits, and the challenge is actually tightening it down to that rather than filling out and giving too much information. Is that correct, Rachel?
Hey, yes, that is correct. So it's about being succinct, and there are character limits on different fields within the application form itself. So don't worry about thinking that you've got to do a giant application. It's actually the opposite. It's about how can you distill your passion, the need that you see, into a smaller space. And
a question here for both of our fellows. Hayden, you said fellow for life and once a fellow, always a fellow. But for both of our fellows, when you were on tour, had people already heard of the Churchill Fellowships? Did you bump into people who knew about what this was once you got there? I'll start with you, Hayden, then Tom.
Thanks very much, Adam. Yes, particularly in New Zealand, and the Canadians were, the Americans perhaps not so much, although in a couple of agencies they had previous fellows coming through before, and they were very interested in what it was. On one flight, I happened to be sitting next to a fellow who had done their fellowship a number of years ago, and it was just, what's the chance of that? So they're all over the place, and they'll always assist. I think that's part of that fellow for life. Part of the mandate, or part of the calling, is to add value and assist other fellows or potentially other applicants as well.
Tom, someone here asked, did you only go to the US or did they miss something? So Tom, did you only go to the US, and did anyone know of the Churchill Fellowships while you were there?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So because the US program was pretty much the forerunner for what I was trying to understand, my fellowship did just go to the US. No, they had no idea. So it was really a very interesting PR, experience to try and explain who Churchill was and why members of the Commonwealth undertake this sort of stuff. So yeah, it was quite interesting to have a quiet beverage at the end of the night and sort of talk those things through with some Yankees.
I might not have known about it before you got there, Tom, but you strike me as the sort of person who leaves quite an impression. I'm sure they know about it now. Rachel, just in wrapping this up, on behalf of the Trust, Rachel, what's your final message to everyone who's online with us this evening?
Look, I'm just so impressed by the thoroughness of these questions. I can kind of tell the people that are on here, you guys are like obviously really high attention to detail. You want to do the right thing. You want to make a difference. And that is what I'm getting out of these questions. So my message to you is that's brilliant. Put your application in on 1 March and believe in yourself and you can do it.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you as well to Tom and Hayden, and to our almost 100 attendees online. Thanks for joining us. If you have been inspired tonight, as Rachel said, go ahead right now and start doing the work required to apply for a fellowship. You might want to attend the information session that's coming this Thursday as well, if there's anything more you want to know. If we didn't get to your question, or if you think of a question after this session's finished, you can contact us directly via the Churchill Trust website, churchillfellowships.com.au, and that website has a fantastic FAQ section built up from years of the sort of questions that people in exactly your position will be asking. Check those, and don't forget, we'll keep this meeting open for another 10 minutes or so. If you want to quickly scroll through the 35 fantastic questions already submitted and answered, there may well be things in there that also help flesh out your understanding of this entire process. If you go ahead and apply, sincere best of luck to you, one and all. Thank you so much for your time, and good night.